U.S. data release gave us the first meaningful glimpse of the impact of the coronavirus on export-import trade. Here are 10 things that I noticed. Some of them perhaps canaries in a coal mine, harbingers of things yet to manifest themselves. Let's start with U.S. imports, which fell 6.54% overall. 3 products soared in March, the most recent data when compared to the same month a year earlier. Medicine in single-dose form increased 35.44%. It rose to be the nation's second most valuable import. Rumors to the contrary, those imports do not largely come from China. While China may be the source of chemicals and other raw materials used in pharmaceuticals, overall, the medicines imported into the United States come from Europe, from Germany, from Switzerland, from Ireland, and as of March, from Denmark. Those 4 accounted for almost 60% of the total. Number 2, the category of vaccines, plasma, and other blood fractions increased 33.35%. This will be a category worth watching as laboratories the world over race to create a vaccine and more reliable tests for antibodies that can quickly and cost-effectively be manufactured at scale. This will be particularly important as the fall approaches in the Northern Hemisphere. Essentially, 2/3 of all U.S. imports came from Germany, Ireland, and Belgium in March. Number 3, then there's gold. Gold takes the temperature of investor sentiment, rising in price as optimism wanes. The value of gold imports surged 481.60% in March. I'll return to gold in just a moment. But first, exports. Exports were down an even sharper 9.22% from a year ago when compared to imports, and they tell a story too. But the story includes the U.S.-China trade war, which we continue to wage during the pandemic. 4. Soybeans, the poster child for China's retaliation against U.S. import tariffs, were down almost 30%. Prior to the trade war President Trump initiated in 2018 to force change in the trading relationship, China bought a majority of U.S. soybean exports. That came to a screeching halt with the Chinese retaliation and China's decision to turn to Brazil, the world's second largest producer of soybeans, often by the same large multinational companies. The Chinese largely use the soybeans to feed pigs for slaughter. China is both the world's largest producer and largest consumer of pork. For U.S. soybean interests, the bigger question will be what happens in the peak soybean season, which remains a few months away in October and November. 5. Computer part exports were off 31.29%. That points to the economic impact of the pandemic. These parts largely go to Mexico for final assembly into computers, monitors, TVs, motor vehicles, kitchen appliances, many of which end up back in the United States. These export and import trends, of course, affect our airports, seaports, and border crossings. Our airports and seaports are, to my knowledge, all revenue neutral. They collect fees based on the weight of the cargo touching down on our runways and pulling aside our seaport docks. Border crossings are often not only revenue neutral, but revenue positive. They are able to fund community services from the fees collected from trucks transiting their bridges into, for example, Mexico. Number 6. 2 winners with trade up better than 10% were Chicago's O'Hare International and Cleveland Hopkins International. Both are big importers of medicines and blood fractions. In fact, despite an enormous reliance on trade with China, O'Hare was in March the nation's #1 port for the first time. For decades, the Port of Los Angeles has been the #1 U.S. port among more than 450 airports, seaports, and border crossings. Until March, only Port Laredo in Texas had surpassed the California seaport. But medicines and the vaccine and plasma categories were enough to propel O'Hare to #1 and help Hopkins grow rapidly as well. Number 7. 2 seen declines of better than 25% were both in Texas, DFW International and the Bridges of El Paso, Texas. DFW handles Asian imports and has a somewhat similar profile to Los Angeles International. In 2019, its top 5 trade partners were all Asian, and they accounted for more than 55% of its trade. This year, Imports from South Korea are down 66.53%. Imports from Vietnam are off better than 50%. For the month of March, 4 of the top 5 were Asian, and they accounted for just 43% of the total. El Paso is the nation's second largest border crossing for U.S. trade with Mexico, the United States' largest trade partner thanks to the trade war. Exports in the month of March tumbled a stunning 41.71%. 12 of the top 20 imports fell more than 40%, 3 more than 50%. Computers, cell phones, and imports critical to the besieged oil industry, taps, cocks, and valves, all down more than 50%. Number 8, China trade was off a stunning 33.23%. That is largely on the import side, of course, with some notable exceptions, like soybeans and oil. On the import side, 7 of the top 20 imports were off more than 40% when compared to the previous March. 3 were down more than 50%. The category of TVs and computer monitors, seats, furniture, and parts. Number 9, trade with Ireland was up 20.13%. Think pharmaceuticals and biologics. Ireland is a true world leader in the medicine field. In 2019, Ireland was responsible for 18% of all imports in the primary medicine category. In the latest data, that percentage had increased to 24%. 10. Now let's return to gold. Trade with Switzerland was up 38.02%. That's largely gold intended to calm the nerves of the nervous. That the gold would be coming from Switzerland distinguishes it from the previous global economic crisis, kicked off in 2008 and 2009 by the U.S. mortgage debacle. Then, as the price of gold rose, most of the gold imports were coming from countries where it was being mined, such as Mexico, Colombia, and elsewhere. Whereas 13% of the gold that entered the United States in 2019 was from Switzerland, the percentage was 60% in March, the most recent data. Gold accounted for just 2.7% of U.S. imports from Switzerland in 2019. In March, it was at 31%. And while much of the gold imports previously entered the country at Miami International Airport and then headed off to Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, and yes, Switzerland, this time it is flying into JFK and New York, where massive amounts of gold are stored underground. Until next time, this is Ken Roberts from outside the Washington Beltway and inside the trade numbers, and this has been another episode of Trade Matters. Thanks for watching, thanks for sharing, thanks for commenting.